This was the year that Ground Zero was supposed to be transformed into a soaring statement of American spirit. The site of the 9/11 attack on New York was to be a world landmark, bigger than the World Trade Center before it. Plans were announced for America's tallest tower, its most beautiful rail station, and one of its most solemn monuments. So we wondered, why is Ground Zero still a hole in the ground? We returned to Lower Manhattan recently and found that 8.5 years later, much of Ground Zero is still marking time. Each year, on September 11th, the emotions return.
Felix Antonio Valle.
Ivan Valle.
The sorrow for the 2,752 people murdered here. The sense of 300 million Americans united in one place.
Sandra B. Ryan.
And the desire to fight back by filling the void in the heart of New York.
Matthew David Yarnell.
But this is Ground Zero today, much of it still a pit, where there are supposed to be 5 skyscrapers, a memorial, a museum, a theater, and a transit hub.
So when you look out on where this project is after 8 years, how would you describe this?
I describe this as a national disgrace. I am the most frustrated person in the world.
Larry Silverstein is a New York real estate tycoon who believed that he would rebuild Ground Zero.
It's hard to contemplate the amount of time that's gone by here, the tragic waste of time, and what could have been instead of what is today.
That size?
Silverstein owns a 99-year lease on the property, which entitled him to rebuild the buildings here. But on the day that we visited, Silverstein had a hard time even getting past the guard.
Can't get onto the site.
The holdup at the gate is a symptom of how much the relationship has soured between Silverstein and the government agency that is supposed to be his partner. Ground Zero is owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It's a behemoth of a bureaucracy that answers to the governors and legislatures of both states. The port, as it's called, runs bridges, tunnels, and airports. The only skyscrapers it ever built were the Twin Towers 40 years ago. Today, the port is responsible for making Ground Zero ready for construction, but it's years behind schedule, billions over budget, and there's no end in sight.
If you continue going at the rate we're going, these buildings might not be finished until the port's schedule, which is 2037. Now, I'm 78 years of age. I want to see this thing done in my lifetime.
This is what you were supposed to see by now. We built a model of the master plan that was announced 7 years ago by architect Daniel Libeskind, the winner of the competition to rebuild Ground Zero.
It's something for the public to enjoy and to reaffirm that feeling of unity in life.
Libeskind wanted to put a very large tower at the north end of the site, right here.
Paul Goldberger wrote a book on the project. He's the architecture critic for the New Yorker magazine.
He had gardens at the top and this spire going all the way up to 1,776 feet.
There were going to be gardens here that formed what he called a vertical park.
Yes, that's right. And then a series of other office towers that would kind of spiral up to the climax of number 1. This is what Libeskind's plan looked like in early 2003 when it was chosen.
What people in this country thought was going to be built here.
Yes, so did Libeskind, I think, actually. But it wasn't.
The trouble started with the tallest tower. Silverstein didn't think the design was sensible as commercial real estate, so he insisted on bringing in a new architect. After a struggle of egos, the curtain was pulled to reveal a second tower design. But this was the beginning of a pattern. Lots of models, no buildings. Instead of a construction site, Ground Zero became a stage for elaborate but meaningless groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. This show was more than 5 years ago when New York Governor George Pataki laid the cornerstone for the second version of the tower.
Today we take Adirondack granite, the bedrock of our state, and place it as the foundation, the bedrock of this new symbol of American strength and confidence.
The granite, with its inscription honoring the fallen and the enduring spirit of freedom, was to be rock-solid proof that the project was underway.
Today, we build the Freedom Tower.
But the Freedom Tower wouldn't be built either. Instead, it became a symbol of bureaucratic bungling. It turned out that communications had broken down with the police department. After construction had begun, the NYPD said the tower was vulnerable to truck bombs. Construction stopped for a year, while a third version was designed and unveiled.
It had become, sadly, much, much more ordinary. The NYPD required that it be elevated 200 feet above the street to protect it.
So it's standing on a pedestal.
Standing on, well, that's a nice way to put it, standing on a pedestal.
Well, how would you put it?
I would put it, unfortunately, it's a building on top of a concrete bunker. It was called by the governor the Freedom Tower, but I said at one point around then, I wondered if it shouldn't be called the Fear Tower instead.
Actually, the Port Authority did change the name. Freedom was dropped in favor of One World Trade Center. Today, construction is underway on that 20-story blast-proof pedestal. But most of the rest of the Ground Zero project is still a question mark, including the plans for a spectacular $2 billion train station. It was back in 2005, in another one of those impressive ceremonies, that the Port Authority launched the station designed by star architect Santiago Calatrava. The station was due to be finished last year, but the cost has now doubled to $4 billion, and this is how much is done.
The Calatrava train station, as originally announced, is supposed to be standing here in front of us. Then the Port Authority said, okay, 2011.
2011.
Is it going to be there in 2011, next year?
You judge for yourself. The excavation that was supposed to be done a long time ago, it's still going forward.
What's gone wrong? Well, failure has many architects. A hard-nosed businessman like Silverstein resisted building landmarks that didn't make sense to him commercially. The Port Authority didn't have the staff or management to lead the development of the Grand Master Plan. And because the port is a state agency, the nation's most powerful mayor, Michael Bloomberg, became a bystander. Throw in egos, politics, and incompetence, and you have a project that is still in a ditch. Saving Ground Zero has now fallen to Chris Ward. Ward is the latest executive director of the Port Authority. He was brought in a year and a half ago specifically to get Ground Zero off the ground.
For me, this is a dream job. This was the job that I always wanted.
Come on, this ate up 3 executive directors before you. Now you're number 4.
I'm number 4. Well, you know, fortune favors the daring.
Ward has a background building big projects and a degree from the Harvard Divinity School, which can't hurt on something as bedeviling as this. Ward set new deadlines and budgets, and he's struggling to keep them. Most everyone agrees he's doing better than his predecessors. Ward told us that one reason the work has slipped is the sheer complexity of coordinating so many projects on one site. The basement is 16 acres and 7 stories deep. Everything is interconnected. A delay in one place can tie up the whole works.
This is like a game of pickup sticks down here. Every single part of this project touches another piece.
Ward sounds confident, but just try asking about the designs shown to the public.
Are these things going to be built? Can you actually say that at this point?
What I can tell you is that downtown will come back.
We asked for an update on all the major buildings.
Number 1 World Trade Center.
We'll be done at the end of 2013.
2 World Trade Center.
Its completion date uncertain at this time.
3 World Trade Center.
Same thing.
Don't know what's going to be built there yet.
Not yet.
4 World Trade Center.
Completion date in 2014.
5 World Trade Center.
5 World Trade Center is uncertain at this point.
Performing Arts Center.
Uncertain at this point.
Much of the uncertainty comes from the second disaster to hit Manhattan's financial district, the Great Recession. Financing and demand for office space have dried up.
Halt!
Fair to say, the most sensitive piece of all is the memorial, envisioned in this animation, 2 waterfalls in the footprints of the original towers. demanded by the families, promised by politicians. The memorial is the port's to build. Ward pledged to have it open by the 10th anniversary next year. But we found his pledge depends on what the meaning of open is.
Are you talking about being completed?
No,
it's going to open and stay open?
That's what I want to be clear about. First of all, we will still be surrounded by building construction.
So essentially it's going to open on the 10th anniversary and then it's going to close.
I wouldn't want to say close, but we can't have a free-flowing open job site when there's going to be heavy materials, cranes, tractor trailer trucks still feeding this as a construction site.
On the 10-year anniversary of September 11th, $7 billion will have been spent, but not one project will be finished. Most of the buildings in the master plan are in doubt, and at best, a decade after the attack, Ground Zero will look something like this.
When the master plan was announced, there was a dream. And I wonder, what killed the dream?
What killed the dream was that it was nibbled away at gradually by politics, by money, and the enormous complexity of bureaucracy, and by the lack of a leader with real vision.
New York has had leaders of vision in the past. Al Smith, the former governor, got the Empire State Building built in a year during the Great Depression. But since 9/11, there have been 3 governors of New York, 4 executive directors of the Port Authority, and no one to see the project through. The next chapter may be written by judges. In January, an arbitration court threatened to create its own construction deadlines if Silverstein and the Port Authority failed to come up with a new plan by March.
You just want to work together to bring this to fruition, to bring this to a successful conclusion.
The fact of the matter is you and the port aren't talking to each other anymore.
Well, we're talking, but not in the fashion that one would expect or hope for.
Talking to your lawyers.
Unfortunately.
Not even 20 tons of Adirondack granite survived this project. The cornerstone, laid with ceremony that Independence Day nearly 6 years ago, was unceremoniously pulled from the site and sent back to the manufacturer. We found it where it rests now, 40 miles away along a highway on Long Island, a monument to the shifting plans and uncertain future of Ground Zero.